Hello and welcome to Learn with Indrjeet. This is another video in the series of videos titled Building a To-Do Management System Application in the latest .NET 8 framework from Microsoft. In the previous video, we started implementing identity. That was the first part, where we created identity related tables into the database. We created DTOs, view models, auth service and auth controller in the application, and we implemented register endpoint in the authentication controller. I hope you have already watched that video. If not, please go ahead and watch this too. In this video, we'll be implementing identity. This is part 2. We'll add identity, authentication and JWT related configuration to the request pipeline in the program.cs file of the API project. And also we'll configure Swagger to allow the user to log in into the API using the JWT generated as a result of register endpoint. Right, so this video is going to be very informative. I'm very excited to jump in. But before that, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do that and also hit that notification bell so you never miss out on the latest content. So let's get started. So here in Visual Studio, let's go to the Web API project, and in the program.cs file, let's start adding the identity configurations. So add identity, and let me just get it from the clipboard, this one. So we are saying we are adding the identity to builder services. So builder.services.add identity. We are using the application user class that we created in the previous video with 2 custom properties that we want to have in the ASP.NET users table here. So the name and profile image, these 2 properties are custom properties that we want to have. Then the identity role, the default identity role, we don't want to customize the role as of now. And we are specifying, we are using the second overload of this function, which allows us to pass in setup action. Okay, so we want to configure require unique email property for the user. So for every user, we want to have a unique email, and in fact we are going to use the email as the username, so it has to be unique throughout the system. So we are setting it to true. Then we want the password to be of length 8. Okay, by default this length is 6. We want to set it to 8. So this property you can configure if you want longer passwords. Then we are setting the lockout option, maximum failed access attempts. So we want to lock out user account if the user attempts 3 times with wrong username or password. Okay, so by default this value is 5, so we are setting it to 3. Okay, then there are another properties that you can go ahead and set if you want to. So allowed for new users, lockout is allowed for new users, it is already true, so we are not touching this. Default lockout time span, so once the user's account is locked out, we can define a time span after which it will be active again. So by default it is 5 minutes. You can set it to 3 or a lesser time. Then we have already seen this property. So there are different properties for user, password and lockout. Then there are properties for sign in the options. So like this, there are properties for stores. I would highly recommend you to go to the identity documentation of Microsoft and get a complete knowledge of these properties, how to set. We are just using for an example these three. Okay, so then we are adding default token providers, and then we are using our DB context to be used. And here is the DB context. It is currently inheriting from DB context. Let's change that. So we want it to inherit from identity DB context, which is there in this package, ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core. So DB context, let me just type in, and yes. So we installed this package in the applications project here, right? Let's close this, and in here, in the constructor of this, in this constructor, we want to pass in the type of user. Okay, so we are currently using application user that we defined in the DTOs. So here in the DTOs, we defined this user inheriting from identity user. Okay, so this constructor has 3 overloads. We are using the first one, but then we can have a custom user, a custom role and a custom key. Okay, by default the keys are integers. You can have a string key, and then there is another overload which has user role, key, user claims, user role, user login. Everything can be customized. Okay, so as of now we are using just the application user. Save that, and let's go back to the framework stores. Now let's go ahead and configure. Let's add the JWT related settings. So let me just get those also. So clear, let's clear default claim type setting, claim type mapping. So we are saying JWT security token handler default inbound claim type map clear. So here we are clearing the claim type mapping JWT. Now we have already defined JWT settings in our app settings.json file. Let me just change it to HTTPS. So we have already defined the signing key, the issuer, the audience and other properties in these JWT settings, and we created a JWT settings class corresponding to these settings. So let's initialize these here. So we want to get JWT settings from configuration. So we are declaring a variable JWT settings and getting this section from the app.config file, and see the name is JWT settings. Okay, now we are configuring this variable, variable from these settings. So what this line does is it takes all the properties, all the values from this section and initialize an object of this class, right? So using the options pattern, now we can use the JWT settings class anywhere throughout the web API. Okay. Now the next part is adding authentication to the pipeline. So let's do that. So add authentication. So builder dot services dot add authentication, like so, and we want to use the third overload of this function, which allows us to configure some of the options related to authentication. So let's put in options, fat arrow, and let's go there, these. Okay, so here we are specifying the default authentication scheme, the default challenge scheme, and default scheme of authentication to be JWT bearer defaults authentication scheme. Right, now let's add JWT bearer and the this function also has 5 overloads, and we want to use the third one to configure, to be able to configure some of the options. Okay, so let's name it JWT options and fat arrow. Let me take those from here. So we want to have in the options, we want to set save token property to true. It says it defines whether the JWT bearer token should be stored in the authentication properties after successful authorization. Right, then the claims issuer, we want to get this setting from the config section that we just defined above from the issuer property. Right, so this will be our API. See, this here is the URL of our API, and it will be the claims issuer. Then we want to configure some token validation parameters. So we are setting the clock skew to time span 0. It means this property sets the clock skew when validating a time. Okay, so we are setting it to 0. Issuer signing key, we are trying to get the issuer signing key from the app settings.json file. So this guy is a security key, and the symmetric security key function is used, the constructor, to get this issuer signing key. So it takes in a byte array, and we are getting the signing key from the app settings.json file, this one, and then converting it to byte array using encoding.utf8.getBytes function. Okay, validate issuer signing key is set to true. Valid issuer is the issuer there in the app settings.json, that is the API, and the valid audience is the audience that we have set here. Sorry, here. So our client application is the valid audience. Okay, we can also have more properties. So validate issuer set to true, validate audience set to true, like so. But for the timing, see, there are more properties that can be explored and set over here, but for the timing we are going with the minimum, that is there. Right now, next is along with the token validation parameters, we want to handle one event. So let me JWT options dot events, sorry, dot events, and we have this one here. Okay, so it says we want to get hold of the on authentication failed event, which is raised when the authentication fails, and on this event we want to set a response header called is token expired, and the value is set to yes. Why? Okay, so when the authentication fails, we want to set a header with y value to the response. Okay, let's save this. Now next, we have already added the authentication service, and let's configure the Swagger UI to add a security definition to the API and allowing the user to put in the JWT token to log in into the API. Okay, so this guy also has a setup action which is currently null. We want to set this. So options, and we have this also, add security definition to the Swagger UI. The definition is bearer, and where will we get the JWT token? In the header. The name would be authentication, type is system security type HTTP, description is the text that is visible to the user, bearer format JWT, scheme is bearer. So this is all taken from the Swagger Gen documentation. And another one is options dot add a security requirement. Okay, we also have this one on the clipboard, so let's take it from there so that typos can be avoided. Okay, so this is add security requirement, and this one I also have taken from the documentation. So please go ahead and read the Swagger Gen Swagger documentation carefully. So it says we are adding a new Open API security scheme reference. The ID is bearer and the type is security scheme. So this is kind of a key value pair. Okay. Now in the UI, let's see. Yes, we can set some options for the UI also here. So let me just give you an example. So options, fat arrow, and let me also take it from the clipboard. So here in the UI part, we are saying that the default model depth, expand depth should be -1. That means the model definitions that we see towards the end of the Swagger UI page, those should not be expanded. One thing. And if we uncomment this line, this guy will disable all try it out buttons on the endpoints. Okay, so I have commented that, but if you want to disable those buttons on the endpoints, you can uncomment this line. Okay, I think that is it. But just before authorization, we want to say app.use authentication, and that's it. So we have now configured identity and authentication definitions configuration in the pipeline. Let's go ahead, run the application and try registering a user first. And then let me just make one controller, let's say to-do groups controller, as authorize, okay, as a secure controller. So by adding this data annotation, we are making the to-do groups controller a secure controller that requires the user to be logged in to the API first and then access any of these endpoints. Okay, so this we have added. Now let's go ahead. First we'll try registering a user, and then we'll access the to-do groups controller without logging into the API, and then with using the JWT token we'll try to access this controller. Okay, so let's start the application. So here is our API. Let's try and register a user. Test user, let me just check. Yes, we have only one user currently in the system. And okay, and let's try creating another one. So paste here. So this is testuser2@gmail.com, the username as well as the email, and the password is an 8 length password with uppercase, lowercase, a special character and a numeric in it. And then we are passing the phone number and the test user to the common name, the nickname of the user. Okay, so now let's see if we have put in a debug point. Yes, we have that. Okay, so let's hit this endpoint, and here we are. So first of all, it checks for the model DTO that has all the properties there. Checks the model state, it is valid. Then it goes to the auth service register function. Okay, and now first of all we are checking if the register DTO is null. No. So if the username is null, no. The password is having a value, yes. And if any existing user by this name, no. So now all the validations are good. So we are going to try to create a new user. Okay, and yes, it is succeeded. Fine. So now the next step is it tries to create a JWT token. So it first generates the claims identity. I showed it in the previous video. Please go ahead and watch that, so you get to know how the claims identity is generated. And then we are generating the access token using this function. Okay, nice. So now we have this JWT. Let me copy this so that we can use it later on. So this is, let's continue. Okay, so the user is successfully registered. Let's confirm that here. And the JWT token is returned in the response with a 200 OK and a message saying user registered successfully. Okay, so the user is registered, that's fine. Now let's check the secured controller, that is the to-do groups controller. If we access any of these endpoints, we should get a 401. Okay, So let's try to get a list of to-do groups. Yes, so this is 401 unauthorized. Right, now let's go ahead and try logging into the web API using the Swagger UI that we configured here in this pipeline. Now you should be able to relate. Yeah, so in the Swagger definition, we added a security definition and a security requirement. So this line is visible here. See, please enter a valid JWT. Okay, so let's paste the JWT here and click authorize. So it logs into the API. Okay, now if we are successfully logged in this API, we should be able to get the to-do groups list. Okay, so we should not see a 401. Let's execute it again, and yes, so now we are logged in into the API, right? Because we are saying if in the header the JWT is there and is valid, then the user is considered to be logged in into the API, right? And we are checking by this data annotation. So this data annotation can be put on any of the individual endpoints, or it can be put on the controller itself. So putting it in on the controller makes all the endpoints secure. And if we want a functionality where some of the endpoints are allowing any user to be to access, and some of them to they require to the user to be logged in, so you can put the authorize attribute on those endpoints, right? Okay, now the refresh token and login functionality is left. So we'll implement a login login function just like this. The only thing is we'll use different functions in the login function, right? And then we'll implement this part. So right now we are sending a empty string in the refresh token. We'll create a database table for refresh tokens for the user, and we'll create another function to get the refresh token from the database. We'll have a repository, a service for refresh token, and then in the controller we'll implement, just as we implemented this register endpoint, we'll implement the login endpoint and get refresh token endpoint, right? So all that in the next video. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you found this video helpful and learned something, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with your friends. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, hit the subscribe button below. Your support means a lot to me. This encourages me to invest more time and create more valuable content for you. Remember to click the notification bell so you never miss an update on future videos. In the comment section below, please let me know what you learned from today's video. What was your favorite part? If you have any questions on today's topic or suggestions for future videos, feel free to drop them in the comments. I read and respond to as many comments as I can. To watch more videos on the same topic, check out the playlist or visit the channel. Thank you so much for your time. Keep learning.